Welcome back to the channel, boys. Today we're going to be doing the third pretty much episode of Championship predictions. Hopefully I can do better than the first 2 weeks. I got 2 out of 12 first week, 3 out of 12 last week, the week just gone. Hopefully we can beat those scores, so let's get straight into predicting the games. The first game is at 5 o'clock on Tuesday night between Nottingham Forest and Fulham. Forest currently sitting 5th place on 68 points, whereas Fulham are just a place and 2 points above them in 4th on 70 points. It's a big game in determining the playoff, really. Forest have been on decent form since the restart, drew 1-1 against Wednesday in the first game back, then beat Huddersfield 3-1, and then beat Bristol City 1-0 before less time out. They conceded a 97th minute equaliser against rivals Derby County to draw that game 1-1. Fulham, on the other hand, started poorly back, losing 2-0 against Brentford and then 3-0 against Leeds, but since then have really recovered their form with a 2-1 win over QPR and a 1-0 win over Birmingham last time out. For this one, I think both teams are relatively even, so I'm going to go for a 1-1 draw. The next game is the first 6 o'clock game on Tuesday, and it was between Brentford and Charlton. Brentford currently sitting 3rd place on 72 points, just 5 points away from those automatic spots. On the other hand, Charlton are 19th on 46 and find themselves maybe getting pulled into that relegation battle if results don't go their way. Brentford, since the restart, have won every single one of them games. 2-0 against Fulham, 1-0 against West Brom, and then 3-0 wins against Reading and Wigan. Charlton, on the other hand, they came back strongly with 2 1-0 wins over Hull and QPR, but then drew last time out against Charlton and then lost 1-0 against Millwall. For this one, I think Brentford have not conceded since the restart and have scored a lot of goals, and Charlton, there's not been very many goals involved in their games, but I think that's going to change, and I'm going to go for a 4-0 win for Brentford. The next game is a huge one in terms of the relegation fight, and it is between Luton Town and Barnsley. Luton currently sit on 24th place on 40 points, whereas Barnsley are just a place and point above them in 23rd on 41 points. Since the restart, Luton, they've drawn 1-1 against Preston, and then they beat Swansea 1-0, and then a draw 1-1 against league leaders Leeds. But last time out, they did suffer a hammering against Reading 5-0. On the other hand, Barnsley started quite similar in form with a 1-0 win over QPR and then a 0-0 draw against Millwall. But then after that draw, they did beat Blackburn 2-0. But last time out, again, they did suffer a hammering 4-0 against relegation rivals Stoke. Both teams being hammered last time out, I think that maybe make a difference, but Barnsley, before that, they were on better form than Luton were. So for this one, I'm going to go for a 1-0 away win for Barnsley. Moving on to the next match at the Majestic Stadium between Reading and Huddersfield. Reading currently in 14th place on 52 points, whereas Huddersfield are in 20th on 46. Reading, since the restart, they drew 1-1 with Stoke and then back-to-back losses with a 2-1 loss against Derby and then a 3-0 loss against Brentford. But last time out, they absolutely hammered Luton 5-0. Huddersfield, since they restarted their campaign, they lost their first 2 games back, 2-0 against Wigan and 3-1 against Forest, but then they beat Birmingham 3-0 and then a drew 0-0 with Preston last time out. For this one, I think Reading they'll be on a real high after beating Luton Town by such a big margin, 5-0 in the end. I think they will edge this one. I'm going to go for a 2-1 home win for Reading. The next game is the final Tuesday game at 7:45, and it is between Cardiff and Blackburn. Cardiff currently sitting 6th place on 64 points, whereas Blackburn are in 11th on 56 points. Cardiff have been on great form since the restart. They beat Leeds 2-0 and then a 3-1 win over Preston followed that. But then they drew 0-0 with Charlton, and last time out they beat Bristol City 1-0. Blackburn, on the other hand, they started well back from the lockdown. They beat Bristol City 3-1, but then have gone on a losing streak since then, really. 2-0 losses against Wigan and Barnsley, and then last time they lost 3-1 against Leeds. Despite the form, I think Blackburn might be able to bounce back. They showed signs against Leeds. So for this one, I'm going to go for a 1-1 draw. The next game is the first of the Wednesday night games in it. It's 3 o'clock at the Den between Millwall and Middlesbrough. Millwall currently sit in 9th place on 56 points, whereas Middlesbrough are in that top relegation spot, 22nd on 44 points. Since the restart, Millwall came back with a 3-2 loss against Derby, but since then haven't lost, with a 0-0 draw against Barnsley and then a 1-0 draw against Swansea. And last time out they beat Charlton 1-0. Middlesbrough, when they came back, they've not been on the greatest form. The first game back, they lost 3-0 against Swansea. They then did beat Stoke 2-0, but since then have lost both their games, 2-1 versus Hull and a 1-0 loss against QPR last time out. For this one, I think it's going to be a tight one. Don't feel there'll be any goals though, as both teams have been quite defensively strong since the restart. So for this one, I'm going to go for a 0-0 draw. The next game we need to go on to is the game at 5 o'clock at the Hawthorns between West Brom and Derby County. West Brom currently sit in 2nd place on 77 points, whereas Derby are just a place outside the playoffs in 7th on 61 points. Since the restart, West Brom, they've done alright recently compared to their form at the start of the restart. They drew 0-0 with Birmingham to come back and then lost 1-0 with Brentford, but since then they won 3-0 against Wednesday and 4-2 against Hull, both scoring quite high in those games. Derby, on the other hand, haven't lost since the restart. They beat Millwall 3-2 on the first game back, then beat Reading 2-1, Preston 1-0, and then last time out got a draw against Forest 1-1. For this one, I think it will be a high scoring affair, as both teams are good going forward. So for this one, I'm going to go for a 3-2 win for West Brom. Moving on now, we have the game between Birmingham and Swansea at St Andrews at 6 o'clock on Wednesday night. Birmingham currently sit in 17th place on 49 points, with Swansea are in 8th place on 60 points, maybe looking to push for those playoff spots. Since the restart, Birmingham have not won yet. They drew 0-0 with West Brom and then 3-0 with Hull before losing 2 in a row, 3-0 against Huddersfield and 1-0 against Fulham. Swansea were on decent form since the restart. They won 3-0 against Middlesbrough in the first game back, but then went on a 2-game winless streak, losing 1-0 to Luton and drawing 1-0 with Millwall. But then last time out, they beat my team Wednesday 2-1. For this one, I think Swansea, they're on a back of a good win against Wednesday. So for this one, I'm going to go for a 2-0 away win for Swansea. The next game is between Bristol City and Hull on 6 o'clock on Wednesday night. Bristol currently sitting 12th on 55 points, whereas Hull are in 21st, just a place above the relegation spots on 45 points. Since the restart, Bristol City have not won once and have not got a draw either. They've lost every single game. They lost 3-1 to Blackburn, 2-1 against Wednesday, 1-0 against Forest, and then 1-0 against Cardiff. On the other hand, Hull haven't been on that great form as well, but it's not been as bad as Bristol City's. On the first game back, they lost 1-0 to Charlton, then drew 3-0 against Birmingham. The only win they've gotten was against Middlesbrough, a 2-1 win for them. And then last time out, they lost 4-2 against West Brom. For this one, I think Bristol have been on terrible form of late, and Hull have actually managed to score some goals despite being on a bad run. So for this one, I think it'll be a tight affair, but Hull will nick this one, and I'm going to go for a 2-1 away win for Hull. The next match takes place at the DW Stadium between Wigan and QPR. Wigan currently sitting 16th spot on 50 points, whereas QPR are in 13th on 53. Since the restart, Wigan have been on great form really. The first 2 games, they won 2-0 against Huddersfield and Blackburn, and then a 3-0 win against Stoke, although last time out they did lose 3-0 against Brentford, but to be fair, Brentford are a very good side and they're probably going to go up this year. QPR, on the other hand, they started very poorly with back-to-back 1-0 losses against Barnsley and Charlton, and then lost 2-1 against London rivals Fulham. But they did bounce back last time out with a 1-0 win over Middlesbrough. However, I don't think that will help them in this game, as Wigan, I think, will win this one, and I think they're going to win it by 2-0. The next game is the final Wednesday game at the 8:15, and it is at Hillsborough between Wednesday and Preston. Wednesday currently sitting 15th spot on 52 points, whereas Preston are in 10th on 58, and a win for Wednesday would take them within 3 points of Preston. Since the restart Wednesday, they came back pretty well, to be fair. Performances were good. They drew 1-1 against Forest and a 2-1 win over Bristol. But since then, have suffered back-to-back losses with a 3-0 loss against West Brom and a 2-0 loss against Swansea. Preston, on the other hand, they have not won since the restart. They drew 1-0 with Luton, then lost 3-1 against Cardiff and 1-0 against Derby, and then last time out drew 0-0 with Huddersfield. For this one, I feel like Wednesday they have to win this one against Preston, who are out of form by they're on a terrible streak of form, really. So for this one, I do think we've performed quite well recently and results maybe haven't showed that. So for this game, I'm going to go for a 2-0 win for Wednesday. The final game is on Thursday, and it has at Ellen Road between Leeds and Stoke. Leeds are obviously in first place on 78 points, whereas Stoke are in 18th on 46 points. Leeds, since the restart, they've done alright. They first came back, they lost 2-0 to Cardiff, but then they did bounce back with a 3-0 win over Fulham, and then drew 1-0 with Luton, but then last time out they did beat Blackburn 3-1. Stoke, they hadn't won until they beat Barnsley last week 4-0. Their first game back, they drew 1-0 with Reading, and then a 2-0 loss against Middlesbrough, and then a 3-0 loss against Wigan, and then obviously they did bounce back last week with that huge 4-0 win over Barnsley. For this one, despite Stoke winning 4-0 last week, I do think Leeds are too good a side for Stoke. So for this one, I'm going for a 2-0 home win for Leeds. Like a Hellcat.